Welcome Juliette Wilcox, Cyber Ambassador to the UK. We're here at RSA in San Francisco 2024 and welcome Juliette to our little podcast.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here, Jason.
Right.
Yeah, so the UK Cybersecurity Council has been doing a great job in trying to map out what a professional framework looks like, because if you're a chartered engineer or many other professions, you know what expertise areas you have acquired, and you've acquired them in different ways, and then you can create a ladder of certification and then that helps both you know where your levels of expertise are and indeed an employer know what they're getting when they hire you. But it's still in formation. Once you can get something that people will recognise, and then you have a profession, and then that professional can move. And if you can have something that feels and looks similar in other countries, then you really do have a mobile workforce and some ability to describe it. But it's something which I think the UK has done in many other professions in the past, and it seems so desperately necessary in order to show that this is a chartered profession. It's not just some people with some interest in separate elements of cybersecurity. It is a profession, and it's broad as well. People tend to think that they see an image on TV of a hoodie and a hacker, and actually you need communication skills and risk management skills, and you need lawyers and accountants and financial experts who all have cybersecurity elements in their job. So yeah, I think that's one of the really important things to do with skills and technical workforce that we all lack yet at the moment and need to build.
And as you say, being so broad ranging, we haven't defined that well enough that someone can sit down and say, actually, you'd be good in cybersecurity, and here's a career pathway that you could follow. So
yeah. Well, and yet, ironically, by that time, most young people have already had a go at interesting things online, which they probably aren't supposed to be doing. So, I mean, there are people really thinking about how you can convert that into something that really becomes a productive career pathway. And it's not just how do you get the skills that people have been using to hack in minor ways when they're younger, but how do you think more broadly? It's not all about hacking, but and you're right, and the girls as well. I mean, it can be a really intimidating atmosphere in a classroom if what you're finding is boys whose weekends are spent playing games and not really thinking more broadly about the interesting things that you can do with some cyber knowledge and skills. And so somehow inspiring a different way of looking at it, a different way of teaching it, so that people are actually energised to look at the wide range of things, and it's not stereotyped. And
speaking of that, because there is that disparity between, I think it's in Australia, around 17% of cyber professionals are female.
Yeah.
We've got the Indigenous population, I think, of females, which is even lower, less than 1%. And then neurodiversity is actually still low single digits as well.
Yeah.
How are you sort of looking at approaching that in the UK?
Certainly through our NCSE programs of Cyber First, we're targeting girls through the Cyber First girls. And you reach right back down into, it's particularly aimed at 13-year-olds really, and they have a competition between other girls from other schools, and it's all very exciting, and they learn to solve puzzles, and they really get energised by this, and it feels like something that they would then want to take on through their school. So there's a bit about how do you reach into schools and go even to younger than that and inspire them to keep with that technical side and find enjoyment in the different aspects of it. But I do think there are other things too. So, where are you converting people from other careers that might have been a parallel option? So they could have been in a call centre, and you could find them actually being quite a good SOC analyst, or they could have been a teacher and actually they find themselves being able to do skills and training, or things that are part of that wide spectrum, and really actively searching for the differences that you can bring into cybersecurity, and showing that there is a place and indeed an absolute desperate need for people who think differently, who come up with different ways of looking at problems. And I think that the UK is trying to do that, both through its programmes that are run through the NCC, but also through trying to reach into that wide range of people who are beyond education, but actually can be doing something else completely different in the workforce, but you can sort of change them. Because what you don't really want to do when you're short of people is to steal the people from IT and put them into cybersecurity, because that's robbing Peter to pay Paul at this point. You need to find a whole new batch of people who can be brought into the industry.
What are you seeing figures-wise on that shortage? I think a recent study in Australia was by 26, about 46,000 professionals short in there. And this is again talking between us, we wouldn't mind stealing from Peter to play ball, like
Yeah,
from the UK to bring
we're
some
short
skill
though
over.
as well. I
But
mean,
yeah,
you're right. Everybody's short. I think well, there was a point when we were about 14,000 or something short. I think we're not growing that quickly enough. I think. I mean, we are seeing more universities interested in putting together training and courses that do incorporate some elements of cybersecurity. We're seeing other organisations, apprentices or actually industry partners growing their own skills. We're seeing the armed forces think about how on earth do you bring in a new cyber cadre, and actually in the end those will rotate in and out of government, in and out of defence, and into the private sector. So I think people are trying to tackle it, but it will never be enough at the moment. And there's something for me about how can you, if you'll never have enough people, what else can you employ in order to tackle some of the issues with fewer people? Things like, can AI in cybersecurity enhance our ability to be cyber secure, and in fact augment the thinking and the capability of humans? Because I'm not sure we'll ever necessarily have enough humans. So what are the other alternatives that we have?
Yeah, I think it's taking out, and already seen a lot of manual processes taken out. So it's actually helping there. Unfortunately, on the flip side, we're seeing the cyber criminals being quite apt at using the AI, especially for more targeted phishing emails, and they're actually able to, sort of do things on there. So it is becoming a sort of battle on two sides. So we do on the good side. And this is the sharing. So I think, in Australia, if I just talk in that sort of micro level, where we need to share better, I think, especially when incidents happen or close calls and say what happened. And, we tend to in Australia shut the shutters right down.
Yeah.
It gets fixed up internally, and really you don't find out too much about what's happened with the incident. But I think with this AUKUS, the ability to be able to share, and cross-collaborate with things that we can do together.
Yeah.
And then to that too, how can we help each other with technologies and skills? I think Australia needs to specialise in something because we're too small a country to say, let's be everything to everyone.
Right.
But how do you see it from a UK perspective? And then actually, second part, coming into Australia, like how can we sort of work better doing that? Because we look up to you a lot for, a lot of guidance. What are your thoughts?
Gosh, they're all quite interesting questions, aren't they? I mean, I think, Australia has a very well-developed and sophisticated cybersecurity industry of its own. I'm sure the UK does too, as do the US. So I think one of the things we've though got to do is to recognise that we can't, none of us can do it all. And if you're going to have an alliance that's going to work really well together, then the ability to cross-fertilise those ideas and be interoperable is going to be really important. So with the tendency that I think all of us can have to say, well, no, it's protecting ourselves, we can't necessarily invite anybody else into that, is really going to be short-sighted in terms of getting the best technology and capabilities. So I do think thinking about both the standards that we deploy, the way that we assure ourselves of things for our own countries, and then recognising how does that work when you've got two other countries to work with, and ultimately the things that we build together in themselves have to be secure by design, in themselves need that cybersecurity wrapper around them. So if we don't work together and we don't get best of breed in terms of the cybersecurity we need to make that work, then we will be really failing, I think, actually. What is the point of having an arrangement like that? And there'll be future technology where we're all going to have different ways of approaching it. And so sharing that is going to be critical, not just sharing between governments, but letting industry share with governments and with each other's governments too. That ability to work with Australian companies with the UK government, UK companies with the US government, and the whole circuit. I think it can fall foul of protectionism or of national standards that feel like they don't want to let anybody in. And I recognise and understand all of that, but if you're going to have an arrangement like this, it's got to be part of the answer to find ways of having at least mutually acceptable standards so that our industries and our governments can all join in and take part in that. Otherwise, we will lose out.
Here in RSA last year, a great gathering you got together for all the UK companies. What did you learn last year that you're looking to do better or differently this year?
Yeah, so that is a really good question. I mean, one of the things I learned last year here and at other conferences that I've been to is that barrier that is created when you find you're hitting against a federal government standard that costs you a great deal of money and time. to become eligible to then sell into that government. And it can come with all sorts of other things that are hidden costs, whether it's being present in a location and finding the people of the right nationality, etc. And yet we all sat there talking about, wouldn't it be fabulous if we could have an agreed standard, or at least 80% agreed, mutually recognised, that meant that if a company sold to the Australian government and passed their standards, that would be okay then for them to sell to the UK government and to the US government. And we all want that, but then it's how do you get there? And what seems to be the thing we have to tackle now is how do we get there? When everybody agrees, what is stopping us doing it? And often it is that last bit at the end, which is, well, yes, it's a really good idea, but not sure if you're going to meet my standards. So it's this, in a way, it's the standards people that have to get together and say, well, what is acceptable to all of us? Or at least if we can't completely have the same standards, can we at least 80%? And then you just do an additional check to satisfy yourself at the end for your particular national needs. That might be, pie in the sky. It might be something that is too difficult to attain, but it would seem mad not to try.
Yeah.
Because of these.
And 80% should be attainable. Like 70, 80%.
Yeah.
There's not that much variance between our countries.
Right.
In so many ways, from laws, regulations, and everything else. And as I said, Australia's been lagging a bit in some ways and we look to copy GDPR, or there's certain aspects that happen overseas we try and copy. I think we're the ones that probably need to fall into line, to a degree, because we've got essential aid and we've got other things there that sometimes are just not in alignment. So
yeah, well, in some areas the UK needs to be clearer about what its own standards are as well. I mean, it's quite difficult if you can't go away with a certificate or whatever the UK doesn't actually have, because you're not able to show to others where your standards are, in which case then you have to be tested again. So we all need to be part of that, I think. But it goes back to what does this alliance actually mean? Where is it that we're wanting to collaborate? And I know that there are quite a lot of these partnerships going on around the world. Everybody's going to hit up against the same problem. Describe myself in a partnership, but I can't agree on the mutual standards. I can't have a supply chain that looks like it understands all the way through what our partners are doing. That seems to be not a sustainable position, I think. Yeah,
I agree. And I think from a startup point of view, it's actually confusing if you go, because you're doing a lot to help. And obviously being at RSA, a lot of UK companies with market entry into the US, how else are you finding best to support? Obviously locally bought first, or trying to support at a local level. How are you finding the good companies? I mean, you've got some big ones like Darktrace, etc., that have entered into other markets, and they've been feeding great information back to others that are following.
Yeah.
What have been some of the tips, or what do you find works for you in the UK, getting into other markets?
Well, I think for most companies, the fundamental thing is you've really got to understand what it is that your product is, what problem it solves. You've got to be able to describe it very clearly in a way that is understood. And then you've got to be willing to actually make yourself physically present to help build the relationship, because it's often about the people as well as the technology. And I think people do tend to think they've got a great product. If they knock on the door of the DoD, of course everybody will buy their thing.
Come in. Where do I sign?
Exactly. But the questions that get asked about, well, who are you already selling to? So what's your track record already? What is your product doing that nobody else is doing, which makes me interested in you? And then what kind of problem do I have that you've done a lot of research on, and you're there to solve that problem? And I think people need to realise that there is legwork to be done. We can help. We can help create a situation where they can at least potentially talk to the right customers, but they have to have done the prep themselves and thought about how much effort it's going to take. And the reward is great. If you get it right, there's undoubtedly a lot to be gained. But if you haven't done the prep, you can find yourself with people really questioning, are you as unique as you said? Look around RSA and see how many different people are doing something quite a lot like yours. So why would I buy your thing right now? And that's something I think bringing startups to RSA is brilliant, because it just gets them to see what the competition's like.
Exactly, yeah.
And what sort of effort they're going to have to
that
put
was,
in.
I think with Cyber, when we came the first year was 2018, when we were doing our own startup. Jonathan and I think we had to pick our jaw up off the floor, But it is, as you say, it's worthwhile because it gives you an idea on scale and what other people are doing. And I think both Australia and the UK sometimes are too polite and sit back on their heels a bit too much rather than going forward. Very entrepreneurial here in the US, and they've really put themselves out there, and they push forward their product. And the tall poppy syndrome is alive and well too, you know. So usually you get sliced down if you're starting to get a bit too big for your boots somewhere.
But I think there's also a bit about have you thought through how you're going to sell yourself? Because you can say, I am the only thing and I am marvellous, please buy my thing. But you could also say, well, I think I'd be really effective if I was partnered with a certain organisation or set of organisations, because I see my future selling into this market, or being partnered with a bigger organisation that's going to take me somewhere because my product is particularly well suited to go and join with them. So you can choose your channel. And again, thinking through what product is it that you've got, and is it stand on its own, or does it really need to have someone who it travels with? And so I think that's part of the research really of and also accepting that sometimes the technical starters of a company are not always the best ones to try to explain what it does, because they're very immersed in the technology rather than understanding how to publicise that and communicate. And so your business plan and how you're going to tackle it is something that I think it does take a lot of thought. Sometimes it takes quite a lot of money as well. I mean, don't underestimate that. So you have to invest a lot in order to get the best out of some of these markets. But if you don't, I mean, there is such a flooded set of other potential competitors that if you don't think it through and help think about what's your area of uniqueness, then you probably will just wither, I think. Yeah,
and I think especially you got to pick your fights, don't you? You know, like you don't want to be going up against big badges in certain areas. You need to find a point of difference, and unfortunately, most people try that on price, but there's got to take price out of the equation. How else do you solve a problem that's better and different to someone? I think your point's valid there, because they say, I'll go up against XYZ, big label, and I've got something better than them. It's like, you may have, but the marketing dollars they have compared to you to actually get that message out there, you could be starting off the back foot. So it's partnering, as you say.
Well, you're right. And if you're going to persuade someone to take the big company out of their system and put yours in, I mean, that's a lot of effort. So you've got to be really confident that somebody will be prepared to actually change their whole approach in order to favour you, which is quite a difficult ask, I think, for anybody. And trying to find the right person to talk to, I think that's also quite tricky too. Everyone assumes you go to speak to the CISO, but the CISO may not be the one that's actually physically putting together the plan. So, and the CISO probably gets approached by 100 people every day, and messages plaguing them on LinkedIn and things. So, you don't want to be the annoying person that's going for all the CISOs. But there are controlled environments where you actually can do that, and also getting to know where a company is sending out scouts to look for things. Again, that's another way of being able to present your case in a controlled and a receptive environment, I think.
So who are some UK companies we should be keeping an eye on that are sort of coming up, that are on the radar at the moment, both here in the US, but also that we can have a look at in Australia?
Gosh. That's almost too long a question. I mean, clearly Darktrace has done very well. Yes, it's been bought out by a US private equity company recently, but it's going to remain a proudly UK-based company, and it will have different entities around the world. It's already in Australia, but probably could do more there. And we've got other companies that have been around and connected to Australia for a while, like NCC Group and some of the others as well, BAE Systems and others, who I know have ambition. In fact, want to work with Australian companies and look at the region as well, where what is looking likely as a regional partnership that could be developed as well. But then you can look at companies that are starting to look at how you use AI differently. For example, that will be an up-and-coming area of using AI differently in cybersecurity, of thinking about symmetric key encryption as a way of sort of looking post-quantum. You'll be looking at people are thinking differently about the cloud and how can you secure, either where do you need to make choices about public or private cloud. How can you secure devices that are operated through the cloud, or is in fact the cloud itself in need of more attention for cybersecurity? And then of course you've got the whole IoT and some of the legislation around IoT devices, again, is going to require improved cybersecurity. So you're going to look at a combination of companies that are tackling and really taking a real interest in the new technology versus companies that are looking at problem sets that need to be looked at as we develop a broader set of Internet of Things or different approaches to tackling our use of the cloud. So I think this is, and it's just moving all the time. So to name individual companies would be quite tricky, I think, without having been here for all afternoon. And I'm not allowed to show favouritism either. Right. I mean, I'm mentioning some companies I know already in Australia. But
to that end, from an Australian point of view, what would Australian companies be benefiting to know about the UK or entry over there? So, you know, as I said, Australia's a great place to base yourself to go into the region, you know, the APAC region. The Asia Pacific, but what about for Australian companies, especially as a doorway into Europe, because it's often a market they want to get into? What's the benefits there?
Yeah, well, I think so. People appreciate the UK because of its research and development and innovation. They like the skilled workforce that we have. The fact that we've opted to be less regulatory than Europe, for example. Yes, we want regulation for certain parts of our industry and sectors, critical national infrastructure especially, but our approach to things like AI and regulation is very much to allow innovation. So I think that's encouraged in other ways. So we have a whole academic centres of excellence program, which really brings out the importance of cybersecurity throughout the university system, but particularly picks up on the 19, 20 universities that really do this well, plus some academic research institutes that pick on certain problems that they look at from within the universities. And then you've got the AI Institute as well. And so, you know, the UK is an area for thought leadership, as a source of really strong technical skills, of being willing to promote innovation. I think that makes it quite a fertile ground for any company that wants to start up and or even develop, you know, organise a company that wants to really use the best approach that it can. And the UK is a way of feeding into Europe or operating into the Middle East. Anybody with ambitions to work in those areas can base themselves in the UK, and they'll find a welcome in those other markets.
And I think one of the things too, and this happens in the US, often people say, I'll go to the US and they might want to go to San Francisco, or they go to the UK and say, London, but sometimes you're better off. Could you suggest maybe going Manchester or other places? And same here, we say you go to Texas or, you know, somewhere else, or Maryland or Seattle. Like, there's other options. So finding your market fit in a certain market is actually quite key as well, isn't it? Because you think UK, you think London, but there's other options out there, isn't there?
You do, and the way what we're trying to do in the UK is create a cluster system, and it's, again, the framework is funded by the government, but what it does is it tries to bring together academia, industry, and government in areas. I think it's about 17 or 18 of them now. And so, yes, actually, London is only now starting to form its little cluster, but you know, Cheltenham's had one for a very long time, and you can find them throughout the country. I was in Lancaster a couple of days ago, which is up in the northwest. Now that's a cluster that's formulating around the fact that the government is establishing the National Cyber Force up there, and it pulls in 5 different universities, and it pulls in green, sustainable technology, and it pulls in you know, some brilliant academic work as well around cybersecurity. So that's one, and then you can see Manchester, and you can see Wales. Wales is another really interesting example where you've got a data-strong workforce, because the government has got the Passport Office, the Driver Licensing Office, Office of National Statistics. So it's established a workforce of data-literate people. And you combine that with 3 or 4 universities of outstanding research, innovation, and indeed undergraduate. And you combine that with industries that have set up their SOCs there. So there are some major UK and overseas companies who've put their industry centre for their SOCs there. And you play into that some sort of defence capabilities again in that area, and you suddenly get a whole ecosystem of really capable cybersecurity research, innovation workforce, etc., and it kind of builds into something really powerful. And that notion of bringing those together, and it pops up in, as I say, 17, 18 places around the UK, and So it's not just in London by any means, and that's the direction it will continue to grow. Cyber UK is at Birmingham next week, and the Midlands is very powerful, and indeed has MOUs with Maryland over here in the US. So you can see how you can develop international relationships too, and welcome in companies from all over the world. So yeah, it's a powerful thing. Don't just think London.
Yeah, no, I think that's a key thing, because I think people go, oh, that could be a bit expensive. I know some companies that's where they've ended up, and said that cost of living sometimes when you're a startup can be difficult. What about going the other way to Australia? What sort of advice or do you give to sort of companies, or how can we make things better for the other way around?
It's interesting because when I visited Australia about 18 months ago now, and we were lucky, we went to Melbourne and to Sydney and to Canberra, and talking to the different state authorities there, I mean, it was just interesting how welcoming, but also how sophisticated that your own cybersecurity industries were, but separated too in terms of financial and business and then government. And so my advice to any UK companies is, if you want to work with the federal government, I mean, you really need to go to Canberra, because that's where all the main decisions will be made. And if you're not there, you really won't really be listened to. But there is still such a lot of exciting prospect in the other parts of Australia. And I know that when I visited, you just had a major data breach, and it just was reminding everybody where you can recover powerfully is through digital technology, but also how potentially vulnerable citizens' data can be, and that is a spur, and so it kind of enlivens the marketplace as well. So I think one thing that puts people off going to Australia is distance. It's a long way. If I'm advising UK companies, sometimes they will say, well, it's a long way away to Australia. Do I really have to go? Yes, you do. If you're a company that wants to work with the Australian government, you really need to be close. But there will be other ways of working with state governments, of getting involved with the financial services sector, of partnering. I mean, that is just key, I think, for me. And I would advise any company to think about not just entering a country and assuming you're going to stick your flag in the ground and set up shop, but who are you going to work with? Can you find somebody that's someone who can either partner with you, or you can join with them for certain contracts, or find your way into a foreign country with a gentle landing. But equally, you've got to be serious, because there's a lot of competition. So don't just think you can go there and offer something because it won't be already in Australia. There's a pretty good chance it will. So your ability to show you're unique is exactly the same as if you're trying to come and sell here in the US. You've got to be on the top of your game, but be able to explain it well, and you've got to show where it fits into the market. And I think really be dedicated to bringing your capabilities for the benefit of the Australian people, just like you'd expect anywhere.
I think we need to look at, for UK companies coming in, look at that strategy. I'd say look at the cyber strategy. It's actually broken up pretty clearly till 2030 with 3 main horizons. And say, actually, does our product fit in there? Because there may not be a sovereign capability, and it's something they could solve for. So that's something I think we could work together to actually break that out and say, okay, UK companies, here's a gap in the market. Are you able to fill it? Do you want to fill it? And have capacity, and try and make that a bit easier as well.
Well, I think so. I think both of our governments need to do that, to make those problem statements accessible. I mean, sometimes, especially if it's a government problem statement, they've tended to be quite quiet about that, because they don't want to tell everybody what your problems are. But there has to be a way of giving a chance for industry to sort of work on issues, to co-create, to invite people who have answers from wherever, but particularly from countries where you've got trusted partnerships, to come and help solve those problems, to open up some of our research institutes. I'd be really interested to know, for example, whether some of our incubators can help some non-Indigenous companies to grow, because it's all about, in the end, trying to find the right bits of the jigsaw for your cybersecurity problem.
Yeah, I think that's something we've got to look at too, is the incubation parts, because again, Australian companies tend to go to the US a lot for that sort of thing, but is there a way we can make that easier for them to land in the UK and sort of get involved in that ecosystem? Because they'll learn a lot. You learn a lot more when you go somewhere offshore, because you're not hearing the same stories. You're hearing something completely different from a different aspect. Have you got parts open up that maybe we could participate in there?
Well, I think it would be good to explore that too. I mean, I think in terms of incubation of startups, in some ways, we've all got ways of kicking people off. I mean, we've got Plexel and other places in the UK, and you'll have similar in Australia. In a way, the bit that's more difficult is the next bit.
Yep.
So you can kick somebody off with a bit of angel funding and see if their idea is going anywhere. But it's the bit where they want to grow and really establish themselves and move perhaps from that position to where they can export. And that's the bit where I think we lack funding. I mean, certainly there are companies in the UK, I'm sure it's the same in Australia, where you get to a certain point where they've maybe taken out loans to get to the size that allows them to do viable products, and they may even have customers overseas. But the difference between selling something and being paid for it is a gap that's too big for small companies. So where is the ability to get funding to carry you through that early stage? And the money still seems to be mainly here in the US. And that's something I think we need to try to change in both our countries, which is how can you get people to take more risk for that level, the bit that's after the initial seed funding, so that you can get companies to grow in a way that perhaps US companies get a bit more of a head start. Or our companies turn to US investors. I mean, that's the other thing, that they can find that that's their only source of funding, which is great while it gets them to grow. But at the end of the day, does that mean that they are ending up being sort of drawn, gravitational pull towards the money rather than growing in our own countries? So I think I don't know, maybe our financing experts are not as big a risk takers as the ones in the US, or maybe there's just less money around.
Especially during COVID, a lot of the funding sort of dried up. There wasn't a lot of businesses sort of starting up during that COVID period. And then coming out of that, some businesses actually found COVID quite useful because it grew their business. But now they're in that really ugly stage, as you say, where it's enough sales, but it's not enough sales for the growth, or they're having to grow to service the market, and then they've got to make that extra income. It is easier to get finance in the US, and they're probably a bit more flexible on terms. Often in Australia, it's the bank saying, "Well, give us a part of your house, and we'll help you grow your business." You know what I mean? It's, so that's where I think we get hamstrung a bit, and being such a small market, probably less than 2% of the total addressable market, that you look at other markets like the UK or the US to actually go and expand into. But how do you get that funding? I think that's the billion-dollar question in some cases.
It is, but there's also a billion-dollar question, which is the amount of money that's getting lost in the economy to cybercrime. I mean, if you start to do the maths, I've been giving speeches recently where I've described it as the hole in the bucket. And you're looking to grow your economy, and you're putting investment into the economy, and it's going straight out of the bottom to cybercrime. So actually, is there something that the governments can recognise, is that investing in cybersecurity domestically and growing those industries domestically in the end will help them to export, but fundamentally it's also going to help promote growth within our countries. And that economic argument, I don't think, gets used enough as a way of saying our cybersecurity ecosystem needs to be the foundation of our future economy, not just an add-on or a thing that you think about because you're scared about a cyber attack. It's fundamental to all our industries growing. So that's part of the investment question, really. And I would like to see that being much better understood by any organisation, so that they then can invest in both their own cybersecurity and as a result grow the industries that back it up.
Yeah, you mentioned the attacks that had happened just prior to you coming. I think there was one either side of your visit to Australia last time. You were sandwiched right in the middle of those. And they are ways of getting companies motivated, unfortunately, to a degree. Sometimes they say, well, that was close, that could have been us, and that'll get... But it's a sort of sugar hit sometimes, and it only happens for a period of time. How have you found the good companies are actually sort of saying it? Because it's almost like an insurance policy, isn't it? You spend money and they have budget for something. But the flip side of that is if they don't have coverage for it, the cost can be a lot more. So how have you seen that sort of?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because often people do need to experience the pain before they're willing to invest. And I don't think the economic argument has necessarily been made powerfully enough, because people will get hit one way or another. I mean, there's no doubt that something will affect them. And actually, you don't buy a car without seatbelts anymore. You just assume that to be part of your operating process. So building it in by encouraging people to have insurance that requires a certain level of cybersecurity. So using other bits of the private sector to encourage you to do the right things. And then once you raise everybody's level of awareness and resilience, then that sort of collectively should hopefully reduce the problem a bit too. And then, you know, the costs can be stabilised. But yeah, it's hard because people tend to think, I don't need this until they have an accident. But let's say there are industries where we've got over that and people have recognised that the accident is coming to a place near them. And so if they're not properly ready for it, then they are going to end up, you know, very badly hit.
And what do you see the next 12 or 24 months are like for yourself and for the country in general?
Yeah.
What are your sort of plans?
Well, I think, so we're going to make sure that the UK, as it sort of thinks through its next iteration, will be, I think collectively, we've written 3 strategies. They never sit still. So, you know, we're always going to be looking ahead. We'll be expecting at some point a new sort of review of security. It always comes with, you know, new governments. We've just done a review in the UK. One of our MPs has just done a review of how cybersecurity can promote economic growth. So that will have some recommendations again, and that should feed back into our strategy of how we're going to keep that ecosystem as a way of keeping the country not only safe but, you know, prosperous as well. And I'm thinking of it through the prosperity lens. And I think in the meantime, we just expect and want to work more with partners as well. I mean, there's the policy level and the thought leadership level, but there's also on there where is the best industry, products, services, capabilities, and working together across these interesting international alliances. And I would expect that to feed into things that are really active. So I'd like to see AUKUS Pillar 2 become a really active stream, which again, I think is really only in the early stages at the moment. What does it really mean? What can we do together? So I'd like to see that becoming something that's, you know, really alive. And then I think we'll be watching for how future technology, we'll watch AI develop really rapidly. So how can that feed into new ways of looking at cybersecurity? Obviously, there'll be new threats that we'll all have to work against too. And so I'd expect some of that future technology to really start to come rapidly into view as well over the next year or two. And that just means that there's a need for all of that research and innovation to be multiplied really, but to be shared too, and don't, you know, try not to duplicate. If you've got friends and allies and partners doing something, then for goodness sake, don't you know, duplicate that if you don't need to. Build on it and work together.
Yeah, well, I look forward to working together. Always a pleasure.
Indeed.
And we'll be back here together again in 2025, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Look forward to it. Thank you.